There we go. Great. Secretary Young, do you want to kick us off? I'm happy to help out as well.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. It is Friday, October 29, 2021, and this is the meeting of the Vermont Climate Council Steering Committee. It's 3 o'clock. We are starting the meeting now with the overview of the agenda. The first item of business will be approval of the minutes from October 14. The next agenda item will be to confirm Climate Council meetings and our process through December 1st, which is the date upon which the Council shall adopt the Climate Action Plan. We will do an update on the Climate Action Plan outline, cross-cutting pathway conversations and implementation sections of the CAP and description of funding in the CAP. And we will talk about communications with the legislature around the initial Climate Action Plan, followed by public comment and adjournment on or about 4 o'clock. So thank you, David.
Excellent. Okay. Any concerns, comments about what we want to do in this hour from folks here? We all good? Okay, great. All right, so the practical stuff, approval of the minutes as usual, they're hyperlinked into the agenda. Let me give folks a minute if they haven't had a chance to look, pull those up and give folks 1 second here to look at that. Any concerns about the minutes or any requests for some more time to look at them? Okay, hearing no concerns or no thumbs up from Chris. We'll take those as adopted. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so the first thing we wanted to do was to use this as an opportunity to look forward on the meetings that are coming, including next week's, but really think about our flow. We did this before in the last meeting, but Jane can walk us through, hey, folks, we've got these 3 meetings for December 1st or whatever. This is what's going to happen. Just as an opportunity for you all to look at that flow, give any input, since we don't have steering committee meetings booked before every single council meeting. So Jane, do you want to walk us through or share your screen with a schedule for that?
Yeah, and just a slight modification. My intent is not to walk through the next 3 council meetings. My intent based on the agenda was just to talk about November 2nd meeting, since that is posted and you all didn't see that agenda specifically. And I also want to talk more broadly about the framework that we're using for November 2nd and how that'll support upcoming meetings going forward, just to make sure you understand and support the framework that we're using, which is a little different for this coming meeting. And then acknowledge and respond a bit to the angst that we heard at the Climate Council meeting around review and ability to access documents in an easy manner, and just articulate a different process that I'm going to try to implement right when we get off this meeting at 4 o'clock for the documents for Tuesday, appreciating the challenges people are having with the website and trying to make it simpler. So I'm going to share my screen with a very, way too many windows open, sorry, hold on. A super simplified presentation, just first to highlight for this coming Tuesday, we have the Climate Council meeting focused on the cross-sector mitigation recommendations. There has not been substantive changes to the actions largely put forward the last time cross-sector met. So our intent based on this is that the last few weeks has been refining those actions and bringing specificity and reaching ultimate consensus at the subcommittee on what was being lifted up. And so our hope in anticipating that is that councilors, while not overtly familiar with everything that's coming out of cross-sector, do have a sense of like the large issues that are going to be brought up and put forward as recommendations. So this afternoon, as we put up and post the final or not final, I should say, but the most recent complete draft for the sections related to electricity, transportation, buildings, and non-energy emission reductions. We will also put up a discrete sort of cheat sheet summary of the strategies and actions. So counselors can open up that 1 to 2 page document that lists out everything and hopefully hone their attention on where they want to focus their review. And then use that as a way to lift up through a survey where counselors have questions, want to dive deeper, and be able to have cross-sector get that information before the meeting on Tuesday. And you'll see in that agenda that the presentation from cross-sector is really short, for how much information there is. It's just roughly a half an hour. The presentation following that will be short and high-level support from the technical consultants because that work is done now. And we worked really closely with cross-sector and the task leads to refine a message and understanding of the modeling to put forward to the council so that that will inform the underpinning of how all these recommendations are adding up to get us to 2025 and 30. And then we'll spend the bulk of the meeting, an hour and a half, I believe, on the agenda, lifting up the issues that counselors identify ahead of time and having cross-sector respond to that with some more detail or information and just being able to have a dialogue back and forth and get a little deeper than we do normally, recognizing that we don't have a lot of other time left in council meetings for substantive discussions. So we're going to try to get to as many issues as possible. I wanted to just sort of lift that up because we're hoping that we'll put forward a similar process for the work coming out of Ag and Eco and Rural Resilience when those drafts are posted on Tuesday. We'll put together a summary of all of the work for strategies and actions for both of those subcommittees and also do a survey. And for them, they'll have the benefit of getting that those survey results on Friday when they meet again, so they can really prepare their presentations for the following Tuesday to speak to those issues. So I'm hopeful that this is it allows us to dive deeper. I know people have been anxious to get there, and hopefully with David's thoughtful facilitation, we'll be able to have some good conversation and identify those issues. Just want to say that really hearing the stress from counselors as well as subcommittees, it is an ongoing daily stress sort of parade for everybody. As I was jokingly sharing with Julie, I feel like everybody's sort of in the red zone on the timeline and what's being asked of them. In order to try to lift up and make things easier, not in addition to providing the link to the website, my recommendation at this point is to also attach. I know I've been reluctant to send emails with a million attachments, but we'll send an email that includes all of the salient documents for the council meeting attached with the agenda, so everybody has them in Word format right there to easily access and provide edits or read or do whatever they would like to do with them to prepare for the meeting. So that's my suggestion for at least simplifying access to documents so people don't have to go through the website if they don't want to. I'm going to stop sharing here and let there be conversation, and then I have a couple slides to help with discussing the CAP outline and next steps.
If helpful, I can also share my screen with when Jane says a survey, what that looks like. So you get a sense of what that is, because I think that can mean a lot of different things. So let me just show you what we're doing here. So the intent of the survey is to prioritize the areas that require discussion amongst the council. And it has 3 questions. 1 is your name. 2 is this. When you look at the summary of cross-sector mitigation strategies and actions, and you read the full proposed text, what specific issue or issues requires conversation in next week's council meeting, because you're not yet comfortable standing behind the idea or ideas as part of the overall package. And we've taken, this is the list of actions that are part of the CSM pathways and strategies. And this is straight out of yesterday's meeting. And then the third question is, if you raised up one of these issues that you want a conversation about, please provide us some additional details about the concern and a potential specific revision. So that's all we mean by survey, is doing that to try to get a sense of where people think priority conversation needs to happen so that we're able to build a sense of shared sort of consensus around this. So I just wanted to add that so you get a sense of what we mean by survey in that. Okay. Secretary Moore, go ahead, please.
Is a question about, and not having looked at the CSM materials yet, understanding if they're prioritized, because I do worry a little bit about, that's a long list of potential actions and would be helped, I think, to know which of those are priority recommendations, or are they all at this point indicated as required components to meet our 2025 mitigation goal? Oh, I see Jane and Marion nodding. So maybe some of them are more impactful, presumably, but all of them are what has to be part of the package to meet the 2025 requirement. Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand. It's Liz because I'm by car, but could I comment on? Yeah, okay, thanks. It's interesting, Julie. It's a really good point. And I do think that as a part of the cross-cutting or whatever thing, that thing we're going to talk about in a second, where recommendations are put together, we could talk about, it's almost like an order issue. Like, for example, in cross-sector, we lifted up the need to upgrade infrastructure in homes as important, and it supports a lot of the other recommendations. So there might be an order of priority issue more so than a what's important to do to reach the goal issue. You know what I mean? Like a timing issue.
Yeah, that is absolutely part of the question, kind of that order of operations piece. Both for things like that. I think for example, for the California Clean Car Standards, are those things that need to be acted on immediately in order to be able to sort of get full benefit of the program. And then the other question was things like a low carbon fuel standard, which I feel like is a little bit fraught, just based on some of the things I've read. If it's not what I'm worried about, it maybe is most particular to that low carbon fuel standard, where if it really is fraught, but it's a marginal piece of this overall package, I don't want that to be where the conversation gets bogged down.
Sorry, I'm mute. Yeah. Okay. Jared, just.
Thanks, David. A couple of things. One question or recommendation, and then I also want to follow up on something Secretary Moore said. Could you mind sharing your screen again, David, with the survey?
Yeah, no problem. Give me one sec.
There's two things. Let's maybe start at the end, the last question, question 3. And that is, I can imagine that at this point, concerns could fall into at least 2 categories, but there's 2 obvious ones in my head. One are people either understand or feel like they understand a proposed policy or action and have a concern about its substance. I feel like there's another possible area, which is people don't know enough about it and they have questions that because they might have possible concerns, but they don't know if it's a concern unless the question is raised. So I just feel like it would probably be good in this language to allow people the opportunity to say, I'm not asserting that I have a concern, but I have a question that I want answered to make sure that I don't have one. Maybe that's too nuanced, but I just feel like we want to create more of an opening for people to feel comfortable asking questions without saying they have a well-formed specific concern, because they may not. It may just be a general question that they want to see addressed by the cross-sector committee in this instance to assess that. So maybe it's as simple as please provide details about either your concern or your questions, because people may not have specific revisions, unless what you're saying is, and I would respect this, like in your facilitator's judgment, like people have had the chance to ask questions, we're not there anymore. It's basically only, we're at a stage in this process where it's really only, raise concerns, and the onus is on you if you're going to put forward an alternative. So I have a couple of other things I want to share, but maybe we can just stop there because I'd be curious about your response, David, and others.
So I'll respond very quickly, which is it's more the latter in my mind, Jared. I think we're in that zone where we don't want kind of like casual conversation of like, oh, I'd like to understand that a little bit more. It's like, do I understand it enough for me to stand behind it? If I don't, that's a concern for me. Like, I just don't get this, and I need somebody to explain it to me a little bit better before I can say yes.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. So we're explicitly pushing it to that place of that. But thanks for that. Did you want to continue on, Jared, with a couple other things?
Yeah, please. Sorry, I'll try to keep it brief. If you go up to number 2, I think that there are some categories here that make sense to folks who've been in the cross-sector committee, but for other folks, so these are, it looks to me, I mean, we've had different terminology, right? We've had the terminology we all agreed on, and then the consultants came back and said they actually are using some slightly different terminology for their modeling. So I want to tread carefully here, but some of these things like light duty fleet electrification, a lot of the members of the subcommittee know that embedded in that is the California emission standard and Clean Cars 2, like Secretary Moore brought up. And within that is joining the Transportation and Climate Initiative program. I feel like those are specific enough policies and regulatory actions that they should be noted on this list so that people have the chance to discuss those, because they might not identify them as such if it's just under light duty fleet electrification, which has some specific policy and regulatory actions embedded underneath it. Because I just want to make sure that we're having as open and honest and transparent conversation about these, so that by the time we get to December 1st, people are ready to vote, rather than say like, oh, I didn't know that, X, Y, or Z was within that category and didn't have a chance to raise that concern.
Yeah. It's a really interesting dilemma. I was actually of the feeling for a long time that we shouldn't list anything in this and leave it open-ended, and people just need to attack it at the level they want to. We ended up putting these as a strategy. I think these are the strategy level list, right? In part to get a little bit of a quantification if possible, right? It's easier to quantify. However, I am strongly tempted to not even have it, right? And just say, look at the summary, look at the text, tell us what's concerning you.
Or just a reminder that there are specific actions under these strategies that folks should look at to make sure they're not missing something. That could be fine too.
Okay. All right. Great. That's helpful. More hands have come up. I think Secretary Young, you're next. I'll stop sharing unless you want me to.
No, thank you, David. Just you don't have to put the survey up again, just an observation. This survey is going out after this meeting, which will be on a Friday evening before a Tuesday meeting. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. You say next week's meeting in that survey, and I don't think anyone can assume counselors are going to open their email. All counselors will open their email over the weekend and get all of these materials and be looking at them on a Friday night or a Saturday, Sunday. So when I see next week, if I open my email on Monday, I'm going to be thinking that this is all for the November 9 meeting. Again, just for sake of clarity. But that wasn't, I wanted to touch on the conversation that we've been having around the need to understand proposals before folks can raise concerns. And I'm very concerned that I think I just heard that the tone on Tuesday, November 2 will be too late. You've had time to understand all of these proposals. It's now time to not ask questions about the proposals, but raise concerns about whether you can support them. I will just be perfectly blunt. I again think that is, if that is indeed what I heard, it promotes in me the feeling that we have a lot of experts who've been in subcommittees working on a lot of very interesting ideas and proposals that that are going to be presenting these proposals to a larger group of individuals who are not going to have the level of understanding to feel like that they can either support them or not without, one, time to read the proposals and time to ask questions about the proposals and understand them before they can raise concerns. And we're giving them essentially one business day. So I haven't seen what's going to be in the text. I don't know how dense it is. I don't know how much detail we're going into, but I'll just go back to, we had questions on the heat standard a while back. You know, what does that mean? How are we going to pay for, you know, just all of these questions that are going to start coming up, that I'm just really afraid that you are not giving some counselors the room they or the time they may need to understand things. I know these things have been brought up at a very high level to the council, at a very high level. So anyway, the devil's going to be in the detail, and to the extent folks feel like they're being pushed to not understand the detail before they're being pushed to make a decision, and you know, without doing their own due diligence, is of concern. With that, I will admit, I have not seen the text yet. I don't know what I'm going to be reviewing over the weekend, and you know, how I'm going to fill out that survey, but I think it's a very good idea to have the survey because it does focus people on what the topics under discussion will be.
Thanks, Secretary Young. And I think it was my language that you're reacting to. So maybe I'll say a quick word about what I was trying to express there. And that is that we're at a stage of the process where we need to be intentional with the conversations. And absolutely, if somebody feels, a counselor doesn't feel they understand the proposal sufficiently to formulate an opinion about it or to feel comfortable standing behind it as part of a package, that this is a great opportunity to raise that up and say, I need more information on this before going forward. So I don't want to create a sensation that, you know, we're done. I do want to say we want to have intentional conversation that is focusing on how do I need to understand here to be able to stand behind it as part of a package of ideas. So I really don't want any counselors to feel like we're out of time to talk, right? That's not the point. I just want to be intentional about it. This meeting in particular is very challenging because of the time, and we're sending out materials on the Friday before, which is what we didn't want to do. And we just happened to, unfortunately, have to do this meeting. That for us means the stakes of this meeting are we're not looking to adopt these or say everybody's good with these. We're looking to have this moment of reflection around the key issues and talk about them and see how we can address the concerns that counselors have. So that's a little more flavor on what I was trying to express on that. And I welcome others too. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, this is a concern I've raised a few times. I mean, I agree with Secretary Moore's, Secretary Young's concerns about the process. And almost, can you bring up that slide again of the questions that we're asking about?
The survey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So almost every single one of those, if that was probably within an agency or within a legislative committee, they could probably spend months on every single one of those. And so now you're asking the counselors, go, yeah, sure, well, we're good with that. It may not have been part of that subcommittee, so it may go smoothly. It may just you know. I was thinking of all kinds of inappropriate euphemism involving corn and geese, but anyway, it may just go right through and everything may be fine, but it may not. So I hope we have a plan B cooking up someplace about how we deal with this. Because we may not have the level of agreement that I think has kind of been assumed. And Jared, I see your comment there about all due respect subcommittees, yada, 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 but not all counselors have been able to participate in all of these subcommittees. And if you take the assumption that we're just going to all be able to defer to whatever work the other subcommittees have done, you could wind up with a freaking train wreck in about a week here. Well, frankly, on November 2nd. So I hope that we're looking at a plan B. I'm not assuming we're going to have a train wreck. I hope we don't. It would be a beautiful world if all these things, if everybody's going to be able to agree to what the subcommittees did, and we're done. But the fact is, the process that we find ourselves in is we're actually drafting language for a plan now before we actually have reached agreement on what policies we can adopt. So I'm just saying I don't know what the plan B is. Maybe we won't need one. I just want to raise that concern.
Thanks, Chris. Yep, I hear you loud and clear. I see a hand from Lauren. Go ahead. I'll stop sharing unless somebody wants to see that.
No, I'm just going to appreciate something that Jared said earlier, that some of those, unless you were actually in the respective subcommittee, you might be less familiar with the specific actions that fall under it. Jane, you said in the chat, I think that the final version of that survey will show all the actions underneath it. Is that right? If not, I think that we should be calling out.
Complimentary document, just so you know.
Okay.
That
I
goes
think
with
that
it.
to Jared's point, calling out some of those very clear policy recommendations probably should go in there. I don't even know that I would have necessarily understood that TCI would have fallen under that very first short version of a strategy. And to Jared's point, if we don't put it expressly in there and hope that the counselors are leading themselves to the water, something might be missed. And then somewhere farther down the line, somebody might say, we didn't have a chance to talk about that. I didn't know that's what that thing meant. So I'll just say, if there's a way to pull those out and put that in there, that would be helpful, or at the very least, link that complementary document within the survey so people can have both open on their screens when they're filling it out.
That's great. That's really helpful feedback. We can absolutely make that happen one way or the other with the document attached or integrated, one way or the other. We can make sure that that's clear. Okay, great. Okay, this is really helpful feedback. I think there's bigger issues like what Chris is bringing up, or Secretary Young, about sort of what's the plan B if this doesn't go very well. I think, we hear you loud and clear. And, we're thinking about it too. Secretary Young. Hang on one second, you're still on mute, Secretary Young.
I'll just, challenge. I know that some feel we should give absolute deference to the subcommittees, and if we weren't on them, we should take at face value what's being brought forward. And that's not the function of the counselors. I mean, the counselors all have to take responsibility ultimately within their own constituencies, within their own statutory responsibilities and obligations to whatever constituents you are representing. And for this to be credible, I feel like me personally as a counselor would have to be able to answer questions intelligently about why I supported something in the climate action plan that may be controversial or not supported by, everybody. So again, this is not a legislative process where the committees do all of the work and raise up legislation and put it on the floor and say, please vote yay and nay, and we'll argue why you should. This is an executive process. This is a very important document that is going to chart the course for the next, at least few years for Vermonters in addressing climate change. So I don't think the deferential standard applies when we get into the actual strategies and pathways and what we're going to be defending as a council if we come to consensus on any one or all of them.
Okay, thanks. Okay. I will mention that in terms of the sort of plan B, clearly you all as a steering committee have a lot to say about that. And so I would encourage you as a steering committee, if you have ideas about that, that this is a good place to have that conversation. We're proceeding, trying to create a space for people to have constructive conversation to see what's going on, and also have an altitude of the December 1 plan that feels appropriate to the time we have. And we welcome thoughts on this. Chris.
I'm just thinking it may be that, and I absolutely respect what Secretary Young said. I agree with her. I think that it may be that what the best we can hope, the plan B, frankly, is we find agreement where we can. And then we otherwise mark, these are pathways these subcommittees identified. A lot of thought and effort went into them, but the committee was unable to reach resolution on that. And we frankly just go forward with whatever we can go forward with. We may have to miss some targets. And I know what the statute says. And presume that what the subcommittees are coming up with will meet the targets, but we may not have full agreement on that. And so we go forward with what we can, and then just plan to keep on working after December 1st or 2nd or whatever the date is, to keep plugging away and doing the work to try to reach resolution. I don't know how else we do it given how little time we have left.
Right. Thanks, Chris. Okay, great. Secretary Young, we lost you for a second there.
Yes, you did. I got bumped, so I didn't get to hear what suggestions other counselors might have had for a plan B. I apologize.
I agreed with you and just said basically that we would, to my mind, we just find agreement where we can find agreement for this first draft, and otherwise keep plugging away.
Yeah, well, I have a slightly different suggestion, which is give us the time that we thought we were going to have going into this meeting, which was a whole week. And could we repurpose Tuesday afternoon's meeting around the proposals to be still focused, but to be the information gathering, question asking session, and then talk about this the following week. It doesn't fit neatly. That's just a suggestion. And we could try it with a survey, but I think plan B, maybe there might be so much in there. We'll have to spend more time on Monday answering questions than discussing whether it's good policy or not.
So I think thanks, Secretary. I think we're talking about two different levels of plan Bs. One was like overall December 1st, can we get there? And the other is Tuesday's meeting, because it's a tight time frame for people to be able to look at the documents. So my hope is that the conversation on Tuesday is people being able to lift up these questions like, I don't get it. I'm concerned about this. My understanding is this. Can you help me understand it better? That's the conversation I'd love to have on Tuesday. We're not trying to put this package of ideas to bed on Tuesday. We're trying to lift up where there's concerns and have the conversation around those concerns. On November 16th, we'll come back and finalize other pieces to this puzzle if there's still outstanding pieces. But we really want to be able to get into the weeds on Tuesday on the issues that really are troubling for folks, where they feel like they need conversation. Liz, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation and agree it could be bumpy Tuesday for sure. But what I was thinking we probably could do, just based upon the recommendations of the subcommittee and having read all the drafts, I think we'll be in a position to significantly narrow the number of policy considerations that need further comment. I mean, I do think that there's a very healthy chunk of subcommittee recommendations from cross-sector that probably will have wide support and understanding. So maybe the way to think of Tuesday for Chris and Secretary Young and others, that are concerned about this is that, like, focus on the positive. What are the policies that we are essentially on a path toward consensus? And I think that will actually be a good number of those.
That's great. Okay. All right. So we've squeezed up the other time of the things that we're going to talk about. So I want to make sure that we're we make a little bit of time for those at least before the hour runs away from us. Is there anything else on this issue folks want to say before we finish up? Okay. So we will make some adjustments to the survey based on these comments. We'll do that right when we get off the phone. We have that mentality and mindsets going into Tuesday, and Liz gave us a good framing with a positive framing on it. And we recognize that we are all working towards a December 1 deadline. And as Chris says, there may be a fallback towards something that looks more like a plan B if for whatever reason it's not working. Okay. All right. All right. So Jane, for the next piece, we wanted to just give folks an update what's going on in that cross-cutting group. I wonder if you want to kind of cut to the chase about what really the steering committee most might want to weigh in on about that work.
Yeah, there are two components that we need direction on today, largely around two components of the CAP outline. One that actually has the steering committee authoring, and another one around clarity around thinking about how we're going to lift up the conversation around what funding is going to look like in this initial plan on December 1st. So first and foremost, one of the things we need to make a decision on today is that there is an opening letter in the climate action plan proposed, a letter that is intended to come from the Climate Council itself through the group that has been meeting around cross-cutting issues, the CAP outline, and some of these other components. It was directed that that letter was best authored first by the steering committee. And so originally in the outline that was intended to go to the council earlier this week, along with the cross-sector documents. I don't really think it's neither here nor there that we missed that target. At this point, my suggestion is that we'll circulate it to the council on the 16th, which is when a number of other ancillary items in the climate action plan, like definitions and some other components, appendices, those kinds of things will go to the council for consideration as the comprehensive draft goes the following week. So what I'd like to propose is that we need a steering committee member to own drafting this, a steering committee member or members to own drafting this section. And my proposal is based on the schedule of trying to get it to the council on the 16th, that our next steering committee meeting is scheduled for November 10th. And so that those steering committee members or member who takes ownership of this could present the draft to the steering committee for consideration on the 10th for discussion, and then a few days later to go to the council. So I'll pause there. That's one section that I wanted to lift up. And then I was just going to briefly highlight the cross-cutting issues that we seem to be reaching consensus on including in the CAP. And then finally, wanted to just speak briefly to funding and hear thoughts from the steering committee on how we plan to address that.
Great. Thanks, Jane.
I can stop sharing if needed and come back.
So volunteers for this letter that needs to be is suggested is written by the steering committee. Do we have anybody willing to put pen to paper on this? Jane, can you say a little bit more about it? Is this the very first letter out of the box on the, it's like the intro? Yeah.
Yes.
And
well, there is an intro and an executive summary and those kinds of things. It's a letter from the council about the process.
Right.
I think I saw on the slide that it says circulated to the steering committee for the 11/10 meeting. How soon then before would that need to be ready so that it could go through the posting to the website and review of the steering committee members? Is it like a 2-day window? Is that right?
You're intended to have documents posted 2 days prior, yes.
Okay. I'm happy to take a stab, but I would welcome support from anybody else who'd want to join in.
Okay.
I'm also happy to help.
Okay.
Thanks, Liz.
Great.
Okay. Great.
I don't want to volunteer her since she's off the call now, but I do know that in earlier conversations with Secretary Moore that she was happy to assist with this too. So maybe Lauren and Liz, you could follow up with her and see if she's interested in working with you.
And I see
Sure.
Jared in the chat is also offering to provide some help. So, okay. Jane, do you want to give any like quick guidance? I mean, you can do it offline, but if there's anything like, oh, this is a half-page letter, or this is a page letter, whatever. So just so there's some scope.
I'm happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to share some examples from other climate action plans that Marion and I have looked at, and share that with all of you for guidance. And then we'll show you where it fits in the CAP outline.
Perfect. Great. So, Jane, the other things, one was give an update where things are going, top, subject matter wise on the cross-cutting conversation, and then you wanted to talk about funding quickly too.
Yep. Briefly, the cross-cutting group met, and just a reminder for you all, there is a counselor representing the way that this has come forward is that there's a counselor representing each subcommittee in order to represent and uplift the work coming out of each of the subcommittees in order to transition it into a holistic climate action plan and sort of start to break down the silos. That group has met 2 times, and I sent an email follow-up for us to get together next week to resolve some of the final issues for the climate action plan outline, but just had wanted to lift up for you all that the CAP outline was revised so that you'll remember that there's the introduction section up front that has a number of the building, the processes framework that supports the work. The body of the CAP, which is really the pathways section, is in the middle, and then the implementation section is the third component. And within that body of the work for the climate action plan, the pathways, we added a section around cross-cutting pathways at the end to tie together and speak to the cumulative impact of actions from the preceding sections related to resilience, adaptation, sequestration, and emissions reduction. And the sections that have been lifted up for consideration right now really speak to the benefits of compact settlement, education, the consideration of environmental justice policy, and then capacity both within the agencies and partners lifting up the workforce development. And then we decided to move the personal action pathway here around how Vermonters can see themselves in the plan. I encourage the draft online, since we don't have time to really dive into this. On the website has the most current up-to-date version of this. And if you have any comments or input, please do send them my way. But what I'd love to just use your time with, knowing that we dive into things and this conversation could take a while, is really to focus on the final section of the climate action plan. And I would love feedback on this, especially ahead of meeting with the cross-cutting group next week, hopefully. The final section around implementation speaks to funding and financing options. And I really just want to call attention to the sub-narrative here that I revised recently based on sort of my expectation of where we're going to be able to get to by December 1st with funding, and call attention to how I think that this is going to be work that comes after December 1st. And in conversations with some counselors around this and others, we're really thinking about how we use this section to frame up that this is really a policy level plan, and that we need to sort of think about how we transition to the design and implementation of some of these actions in order to further understand the economic impacts of the high priority actions put forward, and think about the long-term funding for the complete package of climate action. And then I also want to recognize and appreciate that there is $200 million in ARPA funding that we have attention to sort of like set priorities for, to speak to both the governor and the legislature for the coming session. And so this in particular is something that for December 1st, our intent is to speak to sort of special appendix that would come in the month of December to be ready for the governor's budget and other considerations. And that would be the heavy lift of the Climate Council once that we know what the priorities are that are adopted in the Climate Action Plan. And that without knowing those high priority actions before the plan is adopted, it's hard to have a conversation around where we want to prioritize putting funding towards. And so our hope and expectation is that we would adopt a plan on the 1st and quickly reconvene in December and set some meetings up to really dive into thinking about how the council recommends directing ARPA funds. So I wanted to set the stage for that because I really can't see on a calendar how we're going to get to this conversation before December 1st, and wanted folks to give me any feedback on that and think about other ways that we might consider this, or if this feels appropriate to you as well. I'm going to stop sharing. Chris, I see that you have your hand up, so
Yeah,
please.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right approach because it's hard to develop budgets around policies we don't know that would get adopted. So I think that makes sense, Jane. And I'm not meaning as a snarky comment. I mean, just practically speaking, I think that's the solution. And just while we're talking budgets, I had emailed the steering committee, and I just want to make sure that my request for an agenda item, I specifically said not for this one, but for a steering committee meeting soon. I'd really like for us to talk about the council's own budget and what we're allocating funding for, especially the work that needs to continue going into our second year of work. So I just want to reiterate that I'd like to see that as an agenda item, preferably at the next steering committee meeting.
Thanks, Chris.
This is Julie. I'm on the phone. Can I weigh in there just for
Absolutely.
a minute?
Yep.
Thanks. I think it's just important to, like, I appreciate what Chris is saying. I think having the council work on a budget request that reflects some of the priority actions that we don't currently have money for, whether it's a request for proposals, additional technical services, what have you, is appropriate and frankly really important. At the end of the day, I think the challenge is going to be this: the money is in ANR's budget, and ANR has some fairly specific obligations to manage that money, the money that's already been appropriated, and we just need to be clear in the conversation. I don't think the council itself will ever have a budget. There will be money allocated for the work of the council in one or more agencies of state government. And it may be a distinction without a difference to some, but thought it was important to flag.
Thanks. That's helpful. Okay. Secretary Young?
I would just point out, and maybe Jane can clarify a little more, because every time I try to find it on the web, I lose contact with Zoom. There is a provision in the Global Warming Solution Act that when the council adopts a plan, Joint Fiscal Office then has an obligation to do an economic analysis around the proposals in the plan. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, and we have been we have met one substantive time with Joint Fiscal.
Yeah, so there'll be some work around who knows, how deep they'll be able to go between December and January. But I'm just reminding folks that there will be some analysis being done by the Joint Fiscal Office once the plan is released. And the way I recall it, it's like forthwith once the plan's adopted. It's, don't dally. I could be reading that wrong, but I just wanted to put that out, that is out there in the law as well.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Anything else on this issue of the altitude of information that's going to go in December 1 versus the next set of conversations after December 1 on ARPA funding? Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, that's great, Jane. So I think that's that, right? Unless, Jane, you're looking for something more on that. Okay. Super. So the last thing we wanted to do before public comment was around what we're calling a communication approach with the legislature around the cap. And this is something that I know that Secretary Moore has been thinking about and anticipating a lot of legislative requests for testimony and the like. And I wonder if, Secretary Moore, you want to tee that up a little bit about what you're thinking and why you think it's important for the steering committee to talk about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, David. So just the precipitating event is knowing that the House Transportation Committee is looking to schedule testimony sort of proactively for December 14th, which will be after the plan is adopted. Thus far, we've had, I think, fairly high degree of success of asking requests for testimony to come through the steering committee with generally myself and Jane, along with whoever the steering committee members are from the appointing body, to participate in the testimony. In this particular instance, House Transportation also sought specific members of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, and just think that it's important to talk about how we are asking, in particular, subcommittee members who aren't full counselors to sort of describe their role when attending testimony and make clear who does or doesn't have the authority to speak on behalf of the council. If we're going to continue to try to have the council speak with a single voice as we move forward, and particularly around recommendations of the council, just knowing this is going to get complicated in short order, and think we would be well served to have a set of principles to share with counselors and subcommittee members regarding how they present themselves in legislative testimony.
Okay, great. And so we don't have that specific proposal for you all to look at right now, but it's something that is worth our conversation quickly here. That sort of protocol around how, who has authority to speak on behalf of the council, on behalf of the initial cap, and how are other folks representing themselves? Jared, and then Secretary Young.
Thanks. Yeah, my initial response is, I think if it's a kind of a general testimony on the council, we should stick with what we've done, but I understand that that's not the question here. If it's specific to, the work of one of the subcommittees or an area of study or recommendations that came from them, say for transportation, my instinct would be to defer to the co-chairs of that subcommittee. So if it's about the transportation kind of recommendations, to defer to Rich and Peter to identify the appropriate folks to testify on behalf as counselors or designees of counselors. I agree that it could be kind of messy or potentially problematic to have kind of subcommittee members who are added who are not counselors testifying. I don't think that should be the first stop. I also think that I recognize and appreciate the ability of legislators to call whoever they want. But I think that the starting point should probably be counselors. And if it is not a general council testimony request that is more specific to a subcommittee, I think we should defer to those co-chairs, either to give the testimony themselves or to identify and request the appropriate counselor to do so, or counselors.
Secretary Young.
I think Jared answered it, and perhaps Julie, I just wanted to go back to our first conversation around legislative invitations to testify. And I think that at least at the steering committee, we had a consensus around how those invitations would be forwarded to the steering committee, as Julie mentioned, and that we would designate counselors to attend the testimony. I hear what you're saying is once a plan's adopted, it could get much more technical, and we might have to revisit that. But when we do revisit it, I think we're just going to have to give some thought to, and I don't want anyone to take this wrong, but we're going to have to give some thought to whether there will be any legislators or the public who might perceive some conflicts of interest. And so we'll just have to be very careful going in and saying what hat we're wearing when we're testifying, because there are so many different constituencies represented on the council, and some who have an active role in the legislature more than others, that we just have to really be careful that we are speaking for the council when we're speaking about the council's work.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay. It seems like we're circling around some ideas, and Lauren's thrown in the chat as well that she agrees with that approach that's been put out. The way I wrote down the approach is the starting place is counselors. For general council issues, you as a steering committee is the landing place. On specific issues, probably you defer to subcommittee co-chairs. And the third piece that Secretary Young just said is everybody needs to be really careful what hat they're wearing when they're talking about this stuff. Does that seem like a good approach? Folks can, if we wrote that up, you all could take a look and make sure we're in the right place. Okay, great. I see thumbs up from a majority of folks. Great. All right. I know we want to do some public comment. Jared, you had mentioned you have an additional thing you wanted to mention before we finish in the chat. Why don't I open that up to you right now, Jared, and then we'll go to finish with public comment.
Thanks, David. Sorry, I'm just realizing that it should probably be brought up because I'm looking at the calendar and realizing that our next council steering committee is on November 10th, which if I read the news correctly, first I want to say, Secretary Young, congratulations on your pending retirement. Thank you for your amazing decades of service to the state. But I think it does raise the question. It's apologies if this has already been addressed somewhere else, but I think just from a logistical perspective, it would be helpful for both the steering committee and the full council to know if you're retiring on November 6th, what the plan is in terms of chairing the council meetings, in terms of the seat that you hold on the steering committee. Is the plan that you would identify a designee, or that the interim person would be kind of stepping in fresh with 3 weeks to go before the plan is due? Or I just think it would be helpful to think through that so we know what's happening at future steering and council meetings with that regard.
Hang on one second, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. I'm totally focused on getting through the next week and the next meetings that we have before November 6th. And we will certainly let everybody know what the final decision is around the chair and the chairs filling the chair for the next the 3 weeks after next week before December 1.
Okay. TBD.
TBD
Okay.
again, right?
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks. Let's do some public comment. And we have a handful of folks who've been joining us in the meeting. If folks who have been observing our meeting today, anybody wants to weigh in, this is a great time to do it. Just raise your hand in Zoom and be happy to take any input folks have. I'll pause and see if anybody wants to make a comment today. Okay, great. I'm not seeing any comments. All right. Anything else before we wind up today from folks? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. We're going to be quickly turning around that survey and the materials. You'll see those go out to the full council. We'll see you on Tuesday and look forward to really interesting conversation on some very important issues. So take care. Eat your Wheaties. We'll see you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, bye.